Hey guys, it's Data Zitics. Welcome to another exciting session. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to add slicers to your tables in Excel. Here I have a pivot table that I created in my last video. If you want to know how, head over to my channel or click the link below. I also have the source data where my pivot table is pulling its data from, which is an appended data that was imported into the sheet from multiple data sets. If you missed that and want to know how, you know what to do. Head over to my channel or click the link below. Now let's get into today's topic. Here I have my already created pivot table and I'll be adding some sliders to this. First, let's talk about what sliders are. Sliders are basically visual filtering tools that allows you filter your data, more like an interactive button for filtering your data. You can add them to your pivot table, pivot charts, or even your plain table. I'll be showing you how to add sliders to pivot table and basic plain table in this video. On this pivot table, I have my product names, total cost, total revenue, and total quantities sold. I also have the product names broken down to the country of purchase. You might want to view your pivot table like this, but you might also just want to be able to select some country of choices instead of viewing all. So I'll take out the country of purchase by unselecting that in my field section. Now I have just the product. I'll close the pivot table panel for now. Next, I'll head over to the Pivot Table Analyze tab at the top. This appears when you click on your pivot table. I'll locate the filter section and select the insert slicer option. When I click on this, it brings up the dialog box showing all my column headers. Remember I took out the country of purchase from my pivot table? Now I'll be converting that into a slicer by selecting it here. I'll select that and click OK. This brings up the countries as a filter selection. I'll reduce that and drag it to the top next to my pivot table for now. When I click on the icon with the ticks at the top, it means I want to be able to select more than one filter, that is, multiple selection, while the icon with the funnel beside that is to clear the filter. I can filter data just by selecting a country or multiple countries. I can filter for Australia, Canada, or UK, or USA. If I want to select more than one country at a time, I'll click on the multiple select icon at the top called the multi-select and then make my selection. Notice that as I make my selections, the figures in the pivot table is changing based on my selection. To make this more visually understandable, I'll go on to open my pivot table field by clicking on the pivot table analyze tab, and by the extreme right, locate the show section and click on the field list option. This opens up the pivot table panel. Here I'll check my country of purchase again, so it's included in my pivot table. Now you can see how the slicer works when I select different countries. Here I have Australia and Canada selected in the slicer, and in the pivot table it reflects just that. If I go ahead and add UK, you will notice that the pivot table has been updated with UK data, same way when I include USA. This helps you control what you choose to see on your pivot table. I'll go ahead and include another slicer with the same process by selecting Insert Slicer, and this brings up the dialog box. I'll be selecting the state of purchase here. I'll drag that right next to the country slicer. I'll go ahead and deselect the multi-select icon. Then I'll select just Australia. You'll notice that on my state slicer, all the states associated with Australia are active, while others are blurred out. I can go ahead and select just the New South Wales or Queensland or Tasmanian or Victoria. The slicer helps you filter your data to any level of insight that you want. Same thing happens when I select Canada in the country slicer. You can see that only states associated with Canada is enabled or active, while the rest are blurred out. I can go ahead and select each state and my pivot table is updated. I can also do a multi-select by using the icon and then select more than one state. Moving on, I'll show you how to edit your slicers. You want to start by clicking on the slicer that you want to edit. I'll click on my country slicer first. You'll notice the slicer tab at the top. I'll click on that. There are different edit options to pick from. I'll be starting with increasing the number of columns. Right on this slicer, you can see that the countries are represented on one column on a straight line. I want this to spread out by increasing the number of columns. To do this, I'll head over to the button section and locate columns. I'll be increasing the number to 2. Notice how the slicer buttons have been divided into 2 columns, which is more compact now. I'll do the same for the state. I'll increase that. I'll also widen the slicer's width so it sits properly, and I'll go ahead and increase more to 6 columns. Next, I'll be position the slicers. I'll go ahead and add new rows above my pivot tables, and I'll drag my slicers on top of my pivot tables so it looks more organized. With this, I can make different selections. I'll remove the country of purchase from the pivot table fields. Next, I'll go ahead and rename my slicers. I'll be changing the country of purchase to just country and the state of purchase to state. I'll also change the slicer style to a darker shade. Next, I'll move to my data table and I'll be adding a slicer there too. This is great when you want to be able to filter your table, not a pivot table this time, just a simple basic table in your spreadsheet. I'll go ahead and click on any cell in my table. Here I'll select my whole table because it's just become a habit for me. But you don't have to do that. Clicking on any cell in your table is just fine. This allows you to add a slicer. It tells Excel that you want to pull your slicer filter options from that table. Then you repeat the same process by going to the Insert tab at the top. Locate the filter section towards the right and select the slicer option. This brings up the slicer dialog box with the column headers like our previous example. I'll select the same thing here, which is the country, and I'll drag this to the side of my table. When I select any country, this updates the data showing in my table. I'll create another slicer by selecting my table. Like I said, you can just click on a cell in your table. I'll go ahead and select slicer, and this time I'll be selecting product name. I'll drag that beside the country. When I click on apples, all the data for apples is shown in my table. Same thing when I click bananas or beans. I'll move on to edit my slicers by increasing the columns for both slicers, just like I did for the pivot table slicers. Next, I'll be inserting some rows above my table so I can place the slicers right above the table. Next, I'll rename the slicers to country and product accordingly. I'll also change the style to a dark shade. I'll also design the table by clicking on the table and select the table design tab at the top. I'll pick a design. I'll also be selecting the total row option to show the totals at the bottom of my table. I'll go ahead and use the drop down at the bottom to select my summarize option. I'll be using the sum, so I'll select sum for all values. Now my table looks good and my filter works just fine. This is a great way to analyze your data by adding slicers either to your table or pivot tables. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this video. I hope you found this helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more insightful videos, and I'll be seeing you in my next video.